I may still be wearing my jacket, but it's open, the skies are blue, the sun is shining, and it's actually pretty warm. It's warming up, and there is a lot that I have planned for the allotment garden today. But April is a very busy time in general, and keeping on our tasks, keeping on our to-do list is really important for a fruitful and bountiful harvest ahead, and also to keep on top of weeds and just to make sure that this year is going to be an enjoyable one. And so I'm going to take you through some April garden jobs, including seeds to be sowing, plants to be planting, and also why hardening off is so important. We're also going to tackle some gardening DIY projects that you can do this month to prepare for summer crops. I live on the Isle of Man, which is in Britain, and we are somewhat similar to Zone 8 in the US, although we don't really use the same zoning system. So what I'm doing right now will be relevant to people who, say, live in the Pacific Northwest and other places. And depending on where you are, it might be that you have to wait a little bit later to do some of the same things. Some of my April garden jobs include sowing a lot of seeds. And up until now, most of the seeds that I've been sowing have been at home, either under grow lights or in the greenhouse. And both offer protection from the elements. So they keep seedlings and seeds warm so that they germinate and they grow, give them the light that they normally wouldn't have as much in March here on the islands. And when plants are ready to be planted out, then I'll harden them off, then take them out to the allotment or the home garden, and then plant them out then. Up until now, I've been sowing things like tomatoes. You can also sow seeds for eggplant. You can also sow things like artichoke underneath grow lights. They need a little bit of extra time and warmth as well. At home, I've also been sowing things that normally you don't need to sow under cover. Things like lettuce and spinach and other greens. I also have sown an entire gutter of peas, and this is, I think, the 4th year that I've been starting my peas off this way. The benefit of starting under cover in modules and in containers is that you can keep an eye on plants. You can make sure that they germinate, you can keep them elevated so that slugs and rodents don't get to them. And then when they're ready and large enough, you can harden them off and then plant them outside. April is definitely warming up, but there is still a nip in the air, especially at night. And so we do need to hold off on sowing some types of seeds outdoors. We can, however, continue to sow some of those indoors. So if you want to sow your tomatoes, your aubergines, cucumbers, sweet corn, celery, celeriac, and globe artichokes, you can do that now in the greenhouse or in the house if you have a warm windowsill and or grow lights. But please hold off on sowing them outside because they will not do well. Not just yet. April is warm enough for some crops to be sown outside. So hardier things like carrots, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, beetroot, spinach, peas, Swiss chard, parsnips, and all of these can go directly out in the garden right now. And that is a long list of seeds to get started with. It doesn't stop with seeds as far as planting and starting off crops in April. If you haven't put your first early potatoes in, you should do it now and then stagger your second early potatoes. So wait a couple of weeks before you plant them. And that ensures that you get a staggered harvest so the potatoes aren't ready all at the same time. So that way you can avoid a glut. You can also plant Jerusalem artichokes. You can plant oca, which is also called the New Zealand yam. Another thing that you can plant right now is an asparagus bed. Now, asparagus tend to be planted as crowns, and they come as second year roots, and they're kind of spidery looking things, and you spread them out, plant them shallowly in really well drained soil. The first year, you don't do anything with them. You don't cut them, nothing. You let them grow. And then from the second year, you can start taking a few of the spears. The third year on, you can harvest all that you like in early spring. Anyone who's been with me for very long knows that I love berries. I made a video about all of the berries that I grow in my allotment garden, but my favorite, at least today, is strawberries. And I have a patch of strawberries that I have just recently put a new pathway through, and I'm putting in some new plants right now too. And April is the perfect time to be putting in new strawberry plants. Starting to warm up, plants are starting to come alive, and they'll establish, flower, and produce fruit the same year. Earlier this year, I bought some bare root strawberries, planted them up, and they've been in the greenhouse, and I have them hardening off at home right now. Hardening off means getting the plants used to the outside climate. So you take them out during the day, set them in the garden when the weather is fine, like today, and then at night you bring them back in. And you do this for a good couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, so that the plants get used to it, so that they're not going to get a shock to their system when you plant them out. April isn't just about starting new crops. There are crops right now that can be picked, including rhubarb, purple sprouting broccoli, which is my favorite crop this time of the year. Also quick growing crops like radishes and lettuce. You can start lettuce indoors now or outside or in the greenhouse and start your continuous supply of lettuce for the rest of the year. And then there's also overwintering brassicas, so things like spring cabbage and spring greens. So there is actually quite a lot, and this time of the year is known as the hungry gap, but it really doesn't need to be. Put in a little extra planning this year, and that will ensure that next year you'll have the crops that you might be missing right now. In April, seedlings are relatively small, but before long they'll need a lot more space. So both space horizontally, but if they're a climber, they will also need space to climb up and to grow on. So trellises and wigwams and netting and things like that. So use the time now to put those structures in. And they could include making wigwams out of willow or bamboo, putting up a bean trellis. Cucumbers can also climb, and I have a great project on using a pallet to create a climbing frame for cucumbers, all kinds of things. Use the time now to get those structures in before your plants start getting too big and desperately needing some place to grow. With April comes seedlings, but it also comes with weeds. So plants that you haven't deliberately planted. Let's just leave the definition at that. And wild plants are a lot hardier and a lot more resilient than your average garden veg. So get in there and make sure that you remove any that you don't want populating your beds later on, especially if they're hardier, tap-rooted perennial types. So things like dock. Dig it out, get the nettles out, do all of that now so that they don't crowd out your crops. Some weeds are actually edible, and I just found that out recently. I have quite a bit of hairy bittercress on my allotment, and it's actually delicious. It's a little bit like watercress or landcress or arugula, rocket in the UK. So if you know that something is edible, have a little nibble and see if you like it, because it might just be that the weed that you have growing on your plot is actually a food source too. There are just so many things to be doing now in April, and so many ways to do it. You can sow your peas outdoors if you want. You could sow them in a gutter like I do. There's different ways of feeding the soil as well. So you can make nettle tea, so a type of plant feed that's high in nitrogen out of nettle tops. You could put compost as a layer of mulch on your soil. So many different things. The idea though is to ensure that your plants get a good start, that you nurture them, and that they're on their way to producing crops for you this spring and summer. If you want to check out even more April garden jobs, head over to my website, lovelygreens.com, and I have a much more extensive list over there for you to check out, as well as lots of other DIY projects and videos. And you can also find those here on my YouTube channel as well. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Lovely Greens. Bye for now. One last thing before you go. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to Lovely Greens and click that little bell icon so that you get notifications for when new videos are out.